Hi, friends. I just wanted to come on and share little words of wisdom about how blame and shame, internalized and subconscious blame and shame, contributes to gender bias in the workplace in STEM and beyond. Now, first, we want to remember that 90% of our thoughts and actions are driven by our subconscious. This comes into the subconscious from this lifetime, and then, of course, previous lifetimes of our ancestors that have contributed culturally to the way we think and act. Now, blame and shame and gender, lots of places we can go there. I'm going to kind of take it on the personal note and then extend that out into the workplace. So the first question is for men. I'm going to give you the opportunity to get really real with yourself. And I want you to think back to when you were in older high school, college, your 20s, early 30s. And in the wake of the Me Too that has been happening over approximately the last decade, there's been new revelations about what consent means and what a positive sexual experience for a woman might be. And so I'd like you to really think deep. Had you ever in your lifetime been involved in a sexual experience with a woman where you weren't clear on her boundaries? Maybe looking back on it now, you're like, wow, maybe that wasn't as consensual as I had hoped. Maybe that was more about what I wanted and I wasn't really listening or aware of what she wanted. Now, that awareness can trigger up or push down subconscious blame and shame, blaming yourself for something you didn't know, shaming yourself for something you didn't know. And this is the internalized blame and shame in the body. And then, of course, of your ancestors. Conversely, women, have you had experiences in your lives where you were out in some sort of intimate experience where maybe you weren't as comfortable with the situation as you would wanted, but you didn't speak up? Maybe you felt safe. There was no part of you that felt like this person was going to attack you or hurt you, but you felt like if you spoke your boundary, if you said what you wanted, maybe they wouldn't like you anymore. Maybe they wouldn't want to go on a second date with you. And so you kind of relented and said yes, when really what was in your heart and your mind was to say no. Now, again, on your part, this creates subconscious blame and shame in the body. Now, how does this translate out into the workplace and gender bias? So the idea is these subconscious feelings of blame and shame. For example, a man might be hanging on to some sort of subconscious programming that I can't be trusted around women. Women trigger me to want to act in a certain way, want to be in a certain way. And of course, women might have that same programming. These men are never going to respect me. These men don't respect what I say. These men don't respect what I do. So what happens is when we get out into the world, when we get into the workplace, even though the men might be like, yes, I'm all about gender equality. Let's get more women in this workplace. And the women might be like, yes, empowering women in STEM. We're going to do this. We're going to uplift all the women. When there's a subconscious programming of blame and shame that these two genders can't really work together side by side without sexual tension or power struggles, that kind of stuff. So the idea is when you do inner work, these subconscious programs, and okay, I want to add one more thing, being that I am a spiritual guide. The story of Adam and Eve, different people have different beliefs on whether that is 100% true story or whether that is meant to be an allegory teaching us something. But at the end of the day, one thing we can all agree on is whether you are Christian or not, the story of Adam and Eve is very much in the consciousness, especially in America. And the whole idea is pinning the fall of man on women. So right from the beginning of our creation story, we have a gender bias that has been put in that women are temptresses, women are going to make us do things that we don't want to do or whatever. And then of course the men are like the women, the women have their own internalized shame over having the fall of man being pinned on it. And that is very real. As someone as a spiritual guide who has gone through my purification process, that was one of the programs that I had to undo for myself. So now when we get into the workplace, what happens is these subconscious bias, even though we're not thinking about them, they create blocks. So a woman applies for a job and this man might very genuinely want to hire more women in the workplace, but because of the subconscious program, he's going to find a really easy excuse to not hire her. It might be a slightly different experience on the resume. I mean, it could be any little thing, but what happens is the subconscious comes in and self-sabotages the movement. Same with women. A lot of people that I know and clients that I have worked with have been in work environments where they knew that their contributions weren't valued. They knew that they weren't being treated with the respect that they deserve, and yet they stayed there, sometimes for years, trying to prove themselves because of their own internalized blame and shame, which ultimately left them feeling unworthy of going to get a job where they feel like they're valued. So the way to eradicate all of this gender bias in STEM is not through policy. Of course, that helps, right? Setting goals for equality is a good thing. But at the end of the day, each individual has their own responsibility to go within their energy field, look deep to eradicate their own biases. And remember, your biases are in your subconscious. So, of course, there's no part in your conscious mind that's like, I'm not worthy of a STEM job because I'm just a woman. You know, you're like going for it. You're a trailblazer, you're a success, you did all these things. But remember, the block is in the subconscious. And that's where the work that I do comes in, because on a level, it's generational healing. There's some shamanic vibes, there's spiritual vibes where we are going in below the mind, below thought, and working with energy to remove the roots of these programs. It is very powerful work that is very difficult to talk to because it's very esoteric. But at the end of the day, it's scientific because remember, 99.99% of every atom, every cell in your body, every coworker you've ever had a conversation with, every paper you've ever shoved, every pencil you've ever written with is made of just energy. There is no solid matter. It's like 0.0001%. And so my invitation for the STEM and the scientifically minded is to start opening your mind to realize that the unified field is no joke, and that maybe the way that you have been looking at the world is the way that you were taught to look at the world, but is it the highest perspective? And this wants to bring up one last thing about blame and shame. A lot of times it's difficult to admit what we don't know, or what we didn't know, or what we knew but didn't realize and act on. And so all of you watching this, many of you watching this are scientifically minded people, and you understand the quantum nature of reality, and yet you're spending most of your life focused on the mundane, the solid, and completely ignoring the energy altogether. And part of that is your own subconscious blame and shame of admitting that you've been doing it wrong, that you've been looking through the wrong lens. And that's not your fault. That is our culture's fault. This is how we were raised to look at this world this way. It makes perfect sense that we all think the way we think. But now our consciousness is expanding. Our consciousness is evolving to the point where we get to move beyond the third dimension. We are being invited into higher states of consciousness of love, and the fifth dimensional states of consciousness of really being able to manipulate our reality in real ways and become creators of our own destiny in very real ways. And the way we do that is to really get into our minds and get really honest with ourselves about what might be lurking, what is still blocking us. And when I'm talking about us, I'm not just talking about you as an individual. I'm talking about us as a humanity, as we're stepping on the edge of expansion in terms of our desires to explore beyond the bounds of this earth and this solar system eventually. And hey, I'm with it. Galaxy too. Like we can go really, really far when we start thinking differently, applying different mathematics, applying different ways of employing our consciousness, our ability to be an infant creator into our technology. Same goes for AI. A lot of people working in the AI and the meta and the virtual reality spaces. I've seen you at conferences, and I know you have some fears, some very conscious fears about the technology that you're creating. And so that's problematic, right? You need to get yourself in alignment with what you believe. You need to get yourself in alignment with your creations, that knowing that what you are creating is serving and uplifting humanity. And of course, we do this by removing the false beliefs, the blame and shame that you carry in your heart. Can we just get into past lives of Lemurian Atlantis? Maybe some of you are just starting to hear this stuff for the first time. Maybe you've heard of it, but many of you likely lived in civilizations. You may have heard of Lemuria and Atlantis. And what happened there is the technology began to outpace the evolution of the consciousness of the people. And that led to the explosion, and the civilizations were destroyed. And I'm not going to tell you that that's where we're headed, because I'm very hopeful and I know the ending, and I know we're all going to get on board with what I'm saying. But the idea is we are walking a thin line here, and it really is time to wake up and look at the world that we're living in and that we have created, and own our part in it, because each individual is creating this. And then together we create this unified field. So those are my words of wisdom on blame and shame and how it's contributing to separation in the workforce. I hope you found that interesting and insightful. And if you want to talk about this more, if you're feeling like, wow, I get what she's saying, maybe I want to start looking into this stuff a little bit more, reach out. I would love to connect so that we can get on the fast pace to home. Many blessings. Mwah.